Welcome to a new episode of the Creative Industry Insight podcast. I'm your host, Bobby. Today, we head back to the skies as we welcome set decorator Celia Bobak, who joins us to talk about her work on Masters of the Air. Celia will talk us through the various choices that she made to create an authentic look for the show. Please be warned there are heavy spoilers in this episode. Now let's jump into the conversation with Celia. Hi Celia, thank you for joining me today.
That's my pleasure, actually. I think that Masters of the Air was one of the most interesting and enjoyable projects that I've ever worked on.
Really? Okay. Because I was before I think we jump in with how it all began for you, I guess, how have you found the reception of the show?
I think it's been very, very well received. We've had nothing but plaudits. So I mean, there's always the comparison with Band of Brothers and Pacific, but particularly Band of Brothers and Masters of the Air. But I think that in the comparison that's made between these two, one was on the ground and you could follow them with changes of set and scenery seamlessly and battles. Whereas what you were dealing with Masters of the Air was that although you had the downtime at the airbase, you were filming people with masks on in tiny spaces. And I think it was harder possibly to hold people's attention from that point of view. I mean, it was such a different thing. I don't even know how you could compare the two, in my book anyway.
Because you have that sort of the same creative team behind it all, producing team, production company behind it all. And it's a way of sort of getting bums on seats by saying it's kind of like a spiritual sequel to Band of Brothers. And then also the fact that this one was shot in the UK, just like Band of Brothers as well. So,
yeah.
Well, I'm sure Band of Brothers also was shot in France as well, if I looked it up. But it's a way of sort of bringing people in, and it's just another sort of story to tell of the saga, and especially with something like World War II, where there's probably so many stories that we, as Joe Public, we could probably look them up, but it's just like, yeah, what an absolute sort of like you can keep mining those stories as well.
Yeah, exactly.
And then on top of that as well, it's like the difference in it, as you mentioned as well, like you've got people with masks and it feels like you can the time of it is very different compared to when people are on the ground, because they'll be moving. You can see the gradual movement from when they parachute into France to then moving towards Germany. Whilst being in a plane, there's a lot of they're constantly moving and they're going from mission to mission to facilitate what's happening on the ground.
Yeah, exactly. I think one of the most important things, the detail that we managed to achieve was remarkable. And it was because we did have time. Quite often when you shoot, because it was basically, we started in lockdown and we worked before we even went to Newland Park. We were working at West Cross House, but prior to West Cross House, me and my team were just sitting around the kitchen table and we were starting to make those telephone calls. And we realized that we were going to have to be absolutely forensic about everything that we did. And for instance, we started off very early on researching the tents, which were absolutely essential because they were the set on the airfield. And we used the same manufacturer in the States who had made the original tents that were sent to Thorpe Abbott's, and that was the level of the detail that we were trying to achieve all the way through. And I've got numerous examples of this as you talk to me about the sets that we did. And that was what was so fascinating about it, actually, was being able to spend time and actually do it historically so that you see the layers when you're watching. And if you go in, I mean, I think people nowadays, they do stop and watch things and rerun them so much, you know, whereas before you just have had a transmission and you could have got away with things.
Yeah, because I was speaking to Captain Dale about that, about how people are very more going to be more eagle-eyed with how they view shows. Because you're right, before, if it was being transmitted on TV, unless you recorded it on VHS, you wouldn't be able to watch that again, unless it came out
Mm.
in DVD a year later, which is a sort of funny thing as well when I mentioned like VHS tapes and the amount of times you would have to get the timings right for recording a
Yeah.
show. But then I loved as well the point about the detail. Like again, that is as like a set decorator, with a production designer, you are the creators of this world. And I guess one, if there's something that's just not right for the screen, that will take the audience out, even if it is something in, right in the background. If you see like a light switch that's not supposed to be there, they'll be sort of torn out of the show.
You know what happens, Robert? I mean, I know when I'm watching a film or television, you only need something that, as you say, catches your eye and you think that's wrong. And you've broken the concentration of the viewer, of the viewing, and then you're on the lookout. But I can assure you that every light switch that we had on that film was correct, on that series was correct, and every light was correct. We even, I have to tell you, we contacted somebody when we were doing the Belgian bit, where Quinn is helped by the resistance. James, one of my assistants, reached out to somebody in Belgium, and he actually found someone who would ship us over stuff. And one of the things she shipped over, we wanted a bar for the Belgian village where he goes in. And she found that the bar, the actual original bar, the authentic bar, which that airman would have gone into, was up for sale. And we bought it. And we brought it back to England and we used it in the set. We built it into the set. It was that sort of thing which was, which we were doing, which was extraordinary. What are the other? Yes, I mean, for instance, the other extraordinary thing was that the teletype machines had to be absolutely correct, and they all worked to send the messages out. And they said, absolutely, we're going to shoot this in close detail. And of course, they never did. And then the other thing which we had, I don't know whether you remember, there was a sort of a typing pool. And we knew that Tom Hanks has got a huge collection of period typewriters. So we ensured that every typewriter that was on the set, we had the serial numbers and we checked it out, and they were all absolutely right for period, just in case he popped over and had a look. So, but it was such fun doing that sort of thing.
So I'm quite blown away that you still managed to get the same bar from Belgium over to the UK. Because I can imagine you and your team's reaction when somebody mentioned that, to be like, what? No, like, no way. Like that can't be true. This
Yeah.
can't be right. And then, yeah, mental. And then also the fact that it's still, I'm not sure what the state of it might have been, but the fact that it's lasted
Well,
all
it was
that
very
time.
worn, but we restored it.
Yeah, but still, even that it's all been all that time and it's still being used, or at the case
Mm.
being put up for sale.
It
Um,
was actually, they'd taken it out and they'd put it in a sort of outbuilding. And so when she went to inquire what the bar looked like in the small, in Ditton, they said, oh, well, we got the bar, it's in the shed. So she sent over the photographs and then we went on from there.
Mental, really. And there's also, I guess, that's like, I don't know if people have like beliefs of fate or and like outer world existence or something, but those are the sort of moments where you think, I can't believe this is happening in a way.
No, it's uncanny, isn't it?
Um,
Yeah.
but then also the whole typewriter situation as well, and about having, if Tom Hanks did pop over and see, like, well, hold on a second, this model's, this is the 1947 model, not a 1940. Oh, this could go wrong. But then also, again, it like shows another hobby like that people have in the world, like collecting typewriters. For him, that's like with someone was if collecting trainers. But I wonder what they must feel like if you have different types of typewriters. Because for me, as a normal person, I've played with one before, and it feels like just the same. I wonder what the buttons must feel like, or like if the dings are different when you go to the end of the page.
Yeah, I think I mean, I'm old enough, I'm afraid to say that we obviously weren't working on those typewriters. I've used those typewriters because I've on other productions in the past, I worked on period films where you want to use a typewriter where you know that you want to use it in the set. And so I have had to type because I learned touch typing on a manual typewriter. I typed on it. And they do vary considerably, actually. I mean, the same, but this, they have a character of their own, as the best way of putting it.
Okay.
Um,
Like in a way, it's like a laptop now where it's they're all kind of the same thing, I guess, with like the typewriters. There
yeah,
must be what is it like I think I saw it in Ripley that is like a certain typewriter. There was like the way that a certain word used to when he was writing the letters, there would um a, a certain letter would fall in a certain way, so that's what gave it
yes,
away.
yes, gave it away, or it was a softer touch than the other letters that he was using. When yeah, you often do that. That's a ruse that's used in lots of crime writers actually in the 30s and round about there.
Yeah, again, such a sort of like small detail that will give away things. Like
Mm,
it's the same with like handwriting in a way. But
yeah.
yeah, really, really sort of clever as well. But moving on from the world of giving away words, the show is kind of goes over a certain amount of time period. Is there, when you're decorating sets, are you thinking that you have to think about what year it might be? So if there's 1942, for example, what sort of color palette you might use or certain equipment that might be out? Or is it a case that during you just treated it as a whole sort of that every year was the same sort of time period?
Well, certainly at Thorpe Abbott's in Norfolk, which was a sleepy old place anyway, they certainly weren't changing anything. I mean, the furniture went in and the everything went in, and then they used it for the next however long they were there. But the point was that what changed was the maps, obviously, the paperwork and HQ was a constant changing thing so you had the blackboards which all had to be done. And also when you had the briefing rooms, you had all those maps that were used, which were all absolutely correct and had to have tape put onto them. We had to have the blinds made that were pulled up to give the reveal of, so that nobody knew the whole thing. The missions were so hush hush. And then you pull up and reveal the map of the day. So all that was prepped. It was amazingly well organized for every set. But those were the things that change. In point of fact, you didn't really the actual running of the airbase didn't change. It was all hospital equipment that didn't change over the war. There were no new things coming in that were used in that way. There was no new stuff going into the mess. They used the same stuff, and because it was wartime, you certainly weren't having inventions and changes to it. It just carried on as it was before, as it had started. And the Nissen huts where the guys slept, well, that was a constantly changing environment because they were all being killed. And out would go their trunks back home, and in would come a fresh lot. So new pictures would go up on the walls, or books would go into bookcases, or that sort of thing. And that's how we changed, how the scenes were changed. The actual running of the airbase was the same. I mean, they had the same projector all the way through. They had the same film projector all the way through, because that was how it was done in the Second World War. You know, there was no money lavished on that. The money was going on the war effort.
Mm. I guess that's also a very important detail that it's, as you said, putting money into how certain things would look and redecorate. It would be just be the basics for people to sort of live and breathe in the army bases. So I can imagine the beds being the same throughout the whole time. I wouldn't be surprised if they still use the beds after the Second World War to house people as well.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely, absolutely. I mean, England was on its knees again in 1945. You know, we seemed to win the wars and lose the peace. So, you know, so absolutely, especially up in Norfolk, which was a very poor county. I have to tell you, Robert, because this is really interesting, that I went up to Thorpe Abbotts, and I don't know whether you've ever been there, but you know there's a museum there, and that the actual veterans all went back there. They made contact, and they used to go back, and the people who run the museum used to also go over to America and go to annual reunions every now and then. And Rosie Rosenthal and a lot of them went back to Thorpe Abbotts. And what happened was that the whole thing was going to be scrapped in the 60s, and they were going to plow up everything and get rid of the control tower. And then this group of enthusiasts got going just locally in the small villages around. And they started putting it together, and they made a little Nissen hut, and they opened it, and they showed people round, and there was a lot of interest in it. And they had wonderful records of all the photographs that were taken at that time, and they made a book of it, a most amazing book. And when I went up there, I must have gone up there in really early on, and I borrowed the book, which had all the photographs. It had photographs of small little photographs, 1940s photographs that chaps had taken of the various, you know, being in the mess, being in the hospital, people playing cards, what the equipment room looked like, all that sort of thing. And I brought it back to London, and I had 3 copies made, and I had one bound because theirs was terribly collapsed. And I had it bound and nicely done and sent back to the museum. And we used that as our Bible. That was our Bible. And we studied every photograph, and that is how we achieved a lot of the intense, you know, getting it as right as we could. You know, that was as the authenticity of it.
So the museum, but just going to the museum quickly, it's amazing how
Mm.
quickly people would want to sort of shut that area down and then use it for something completely different. You know, you just say, for example, housing. How weird would that be if people had housing there? Be like, this is where the
Yeah,
troops were and other planes coming in. But then also there's always something that's like, I guess with history, it's always something like worth sort of saving and keeping there so that people are aware of it. And also like understanding what the situation was at the time. Not just the idea of the world being at war, but also what it's like for an area like that to be involved in it,
yeah,
what what their contribution is as well.
yeah. Well, they were horrified when all these Americans arrived, and and all these lovely fields were, you know, concreted over, and they had all these planes coming in and out. You can imagine. I think the young were quite liked it and found them so glamorous, you know, as they did find the Americans so glamorous. But I mean, I think a lot of the people who lived there all their lives were absolutely horrified by it. And, you know, the children were fascinated, but, you know, but it was such an invasion of their peace and quiet. Of Norfolk was a sort of one of the forgotten counties, actually, because it was very difficult to get to. There were no sort of straight roads there. So it was very countrified, which is what we tried to show in the pubs that we did. You know, that they, you know, when Bucky he does the William Tell joke in the pub. It was very plainly dressed, very, very ordinary. There was no wealth. And in fact, there were propaganda films which were put out by the Americans, made for the Americans, just to show that when they went to these village pubs, they weren't go in there and be flash with their money, because people earned very, very little money, and they were and a lot of them were very poor around that area. And these guys going in, these Americans, and showing off and sort of throwing down, 5 shillings on the bar when these people would go in with a few pennies to buy a beer. They had the American war, the American Air Force had a lot of work to do to get them to settle in, and these films were made to achieve that. We watched all these avidly because it gave us a very good idea what the pubs looked like, and also how they operated. It was fascinating.
Yes, and I guess as a research standpoint as well, just how much gold you probably have there, and how much you can mine from it. Like again, I think for me when I talk to guests, I'm always think the research period of shows is always thing that interests me the most, because it's like then, especially if it's something historic, because then there's so much that as someone asking question, someone who's doing the interviews or passing on to audience members that listen, is the effort that people put in, but then also different different resources that people could look up afterwards, and then sometimes even compare or even be like, wow, like they made it look just like it was in the 40s.
Yeah. We had an awful lot of trouble with maps, because the Imperial War Museum was closed because it was all just after lockdown in England, and you couldn't, and people were working from home, and you couldn't get into a lot of resources that you wanted to get into. So it was very difficult. I had to get maps from, I think it was called McMaster's, the library where they eventually got the maps from. So that we didn't use our natural resources that we would have done here. But I mean, when you think of the plethora of things, as you say, having to get ready, we had to have all the parachutes had to be correct. And parachute, I think they changed. I wasn't involved in that, but one of my assistants, they'd have different models. These were the things that did change, obviously, were better parachutes or better, they had these blue bunny suits, which were electrical, because it was so cold up there. And people were just getting, they were losing fingers and things like that from the frost. And so they had these electrical suits, blue bunny suits. Now, if you look at the equipment room, you will see this and the changes in the parachutes and the blue bunny suits. And the bags and all that sort of thing. They changed. So the equipment room was one of the areas where things did change, obviously, for the safety of the crews, that they did improve things. But I just wanted to talk to you about some of the funny things of doing this, of doing airbase at Thorpe Abbotts. For instance, we needed to get over 350 bicycles for the cast, and they all had to be 1930s or they had to be 30s or 40s bikes. And I rang up a man down in Brighton who collected bicycles and sold bicycles, and I said I want 350 period bicycles, men's bicycles. And he said, "You are absolutely mad. Are you having me on?" And I said, "No, I'm absolutely dead serious. I want 350 period bicycles." And that started, and it took ages. And he was fantastic, actually. And he scoured the country for them, literally, and we got them all. And then they decided, I don't know whether you remember this, but they had the bicycle race in the mess.
Yes.
And they were racing these bicycles around, and the damage that was being done to the bicycles on this mad race, obviously, And we were having to have repairmen outside just repairing bicycles constantly, and they were just going through them all. And I was at my wit's end. I thought, oh my God, the cry will go up. We haven't got enough bikes, but we managed to get there eventually. But that was one of the sort of crazy things that was going on. And then, putting white painted rocks everywhere so that they didn't drive, so that when they came back in the dark, because there were no lights, obviously, at night, it had to be completely black. And it was black. I mean, there was no light at all. So we had to put white rocks everywhere around and about to mark the roads, to demark the roads. That, or putting up telegraph poles, so much work done in advance, and also coal. We had to get coal from Wales that was proper coal to be used in the camps for all those stoves. The stoves were another thing we had to find. We had to find all those stoves that go in the Nissen huts and everywhere to keep them warm. And we had somebody from Wales who came and put all the pipes on and went up into the roofs and put the little caps on so that we could actually get special effects to have plumes of smoke coming out. And then we'd have fire buckets next to them with great things with coal in them and a coal heap. I mean, and so it goes on. So it goes on.
I think what blows my mind a little bit is the sort of unsung heroes of those suppliers who collect certain things, like as you mentioned, the bikes, and how it's like that joke where somebody always says, "Why would you keep a certain item or whatever?" Because one day you will use it, and I know you'll use it.
Yeah.
It's probably the moment where in his mind it clicked. It's like, this is what I've been waiting for, somebody to call me to use my bikes.
Yeah. Yeah,
But
exactly. Yeah.
but even that, it's quite, it's incredible to hear about just how many things are needed on a show like this, and how many items. The fact that you have to get over 300 bicycles for the show, and how many that'll be used in a scene. Y- I don't think I've ever seen 300 bikes lined up when they used to have the Boris bikes in London. So it's like I can't even picture how many that probably is, or how you even transport so many bikes as well.
Yeah, we had a lot of transporting around because we were filming. We were so spread out. I mean, we were in Oxford filming, we were in London filming, we were in Buckinghamshire, we were in Oxfordshire, we were in Berkshire. There were sets everywhere. Absolutely. We were always on the move. So, a lot of transportation, a
When
lot
it
of dressing of sets.
when it comes to a show like this where there is a lot of movement and you're there jumping between sets and locations, how do you go about keeping on top of making sure that the sets are ready for when the film crew turns up?
Well, that's something you always have to do. We work to a schedule. We work with the locations department to ensure that we get the location early enough to work on, in conjunction with construction, who often have to work on the interiors, change paint colors, change things to make windows look more period, whatever it is. So it's always a bit of a rushed thing. And we're always standing on each other's toes. It never ever works out that you get an empty set to work on. So quite often, because time is money, so you'd get it, we'd all be crammed in there. And then we would hope to have a day or day and a half in which to fine dress at the end of that. But this is common practice in the film industry generally, where you're filming on location. Unless you bought out a location for a film or for a long period of time, you're always having to work with each other and to coordinate. So it's something that we're very used to.
Yeah, I can imagine there's a lot of stress and planning involved.
Yeah, there is. But I don't know, yeah, I mean, it's just getting organized. That's the most important thing, I think, being organized, and also being quite strong so that you move construction along. So you can get the sets.
I guess that's another thing as well. If the sets aren't ready, you guys can't come in and work your magic.
Yes, well, we always get it. The bulldozer effect takes over. We're here and we're starting, you know.
It's
That's what
like
we do.
it's like the
Yeah.
opposite of people who protest for when things get knocked down.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
What I'm curious to know about as well is like because you are, I think we slightly touched upon this with the bar idea coming over from Belgium and dressing different countries. But how do you go about making sure that everything looks different from how each country would look different?
Well, you do it with how you do it is you use items from the country. So you've got to do the research so that you have the right beer glasses, the right, you've got to go into all that detail and make sure that you're not using English props, so that you're using continental things. And we've been fortunate, we in the past, or because a lot of stuff used to come over and be sold in markets here, but because of COVID, they weren't coming over. So we had to scratch about, and we had to get stuff sent in from Belgium to use, lots of things, to dress the bars and things like that, to give them that continental Belgian feeling. Because there were no markets. Nobody was coming over because of COVID. It's too difficult. Too many tests needing to be done. I mean, we were tested 5 times a week for COVID. And think how big the crew were. Some people were tested 3 times, but if you were going on set, you were tested 5 times a week, 5 shooting days. And that took a chunk out of your day as well.
Especially as you said, there's the amount of crew working on the show, being there to make sure that you're in line. And then if the line's too long, do you go back in? Do you come back?
You have to get there early. That's what you have to do. So we'd get there early and go through quickly.
Again, just another thing where I guess in a way, it's like amazing how things got made during COVID times and how much more consideration needed to be taken in terms of how people use their time. Or even in your team's tech case, is that suppliers not coming over who usually would if they had in markets. So then it's like another issue. But again, you guys managed to make it work, but it must have been a lot more difficult and a little bit more stressful knowing that you can't just pop down to Kempton Market, for example, and buy out somebody's all their stock.
Yeah, absolutely. It's more fun in a funny way.
Going to the markets.
No, finding out people and finding people abroad to help us and having them sent over. It was really interesting. We call it going down rabbit holes, actually, when we start pursuing something and you get a lead and then you go on. All the radio equipment. We found this amazing man, or I didn't. Again, one of my assistants did, the most amazing man who had all the period correct radio equipment. I mean, it was astonishing. So that we could do the listening stations for the Germans and all sorts of things, that he had it all available. He just collected all this stuff. And in fact, I think he lived separately from his wife because she couldn't stand it. And so he lived with his collection, and then he used to go and see her at weekends. And James used to meet him. They used to have these assignations on the side. He'd say, right, I'll meet you at, I don't know, I can't remember where it was now, but anyway, it was some Shell garage off a junction something on the M25, because this chap was coming up from the country, and they'd meet there like sort of drugs deal. Do you know what I mean? The boots
like
would get opened and they'd shuffle the stuff across. And it was, we were just so lucky that James was just, he just pursued this and found this guy, like me with the bicycle man. Basically, we just kept rooting about until we got the leads and got on with it. There is one thing that I want to share with you, which I think is quite funny, was that I don't know whether you remember, but towards the end, in the in the officers' club room, there's a Toby jug on the mantelpiece, and it's got absolutely nothing to do with Masters of the Air. But when I was doing the research on the American Air Force, I watched a film called 12 O'Clock High, and in it there was a Toby jug, which was, it's actually Dick Turpin, but all the Instagram chat about it, they all call it Robin Hood. It's not Robin Hood. It's a highwayman figure, probably from the 18th century, and the jug is based on. And I thought, I'm going to use this. I'm going to put it on the mantelpiece in the club room, and I'm going to see if anybody picks this up as a bit of fun, as a nod to a film that was made at the time that all this was going on. And I can't tell you, there's been the most tremendous chat about it, and people have commented therein, and it was just a joke. It's probably the one, it's wrong, it's right for period, but the wrong film.
So going back to just the Radio Man, when you get, even with the bicycle person as well, when you get these sort of, I guess for lack of a better term, random suppliers or contacts, how do you go about sort of enticing them to join the project and let them help you out? Is it a case of them sort of just because they're so into it as a hobby and have such a collection that they know that it's like going to be used and it's just of interest to them, or do they need to be convinced a bit more?
No, I think the thing is that we are so enthusiastic, and often people aren't. I mean, for example, the teletype machines. I was dealing with a supplier that I've known for years, but they are getting towards the end of their careers, and they didn't really want to be involved, you know. But you had to get them done, and coax them and tell them how wonderful it's all going to be, and what a wonderful project we're working on, and show them the set and get them interested. And once they realize that you are doing your damnedest to make it as authentic as possible, and you're keeping your side of the bargain, then they become fascinated and they want to get it right. And there's that two-way thing, you know, which is why we love doing period so much, because we can, you know, meet these people and have these relationships, because it's very rewarding.
Mm. I guess with period pieces as well, it's I guess could be a lot more fun and challenging compared to sort of more of a contemporary film, just because of how you could make the world and the sets more lived in, compared to more like a contemporary. Like in contemporary, you can show it in a certain way, but I guess with like period, you can really age up, but then change the patina a bit more to that sort of time period as well. And especially with there's in a war show where there's a revolving door of airmen coming in and out because of them dying or passing 25 missions.
Mm,
You can constantly sort of change that the way that it's shown.
yeah, yeah, that's true.
But you did mention a little Easter egg about the Toby jugs and how you kind of like place those in. Um,
Just one, only one.
Toby jugs, sorry. Then and which again, amazing how people can pick that up, right? I know they can.
This is what I mean about people on forensic now. They are forensic. If you've got guys who are watching this and they're really, really interested, I'll tell you, the two planes that we made were absolutely right down in every detail. They were absolutely authentic. I know, because I've been on the Sally B-17 at the Imperial War Museum, and I've been on Stuart Heath. Stuart Heath was the company, Stuart Heath's company, BGI built.
BGI supplies.
Yeah, and that was all absolutely correct, completely correct, everything. I mean, it is astonishing what was achieved, quite astonishing.
When you look at his behind the scenes on Instagram and
Yeah,
how they look, it's just like wow.
astonishing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And the fact
he's
that
amazing. He is amazing.
and there's also the fact that people sort of built that from probably like designs from so long ago as well. Um,
Yeah, absolutely.
but when it comes to things like that as well, as a set decorator, what's the collaboration like with somebody like Stuart, or what is the collaborations like with other directors as well and production design? How do you go about sort of taking it? How do you go about communicating your creativity and then also taking in their inputs as well?
Well, Stuart, what happened with the B-17s was that Chris Seegers, the production designer, allocated an art director or two art directors to work with all the drawings and to work with Stuart. So it was a collaboration between the art department and Stuart. So the drawings were being, worked on with him and being drawn up, and that's how it came about. We weren't really, and then Chris Cull, the prop master, was involved with very many of the hand props, and so he again was working in closely with Stuart. But from our point of view, from the set decoration point of view, it wasn't so much of a collaboration, thankfully, because really the last thing we needed was to get involved with the B-17s. I mean, it was just so much work, and we had enough with our hands were full.
Okay. Yeah, because I just think as because they play such a big part in the show themselves and the amount of times that we're as audience members inside the planes, that's probably another sort of headache in itself and what you need to put in and also how the actors will be moving inside the
And we
plane.
weren't involved, and I mean, that was all done, at Symmetry on the screens up there, all those flying sequences. So we were not part of that. We were dressing other sets at Symmetry, I was, but I wasn't involved in any way of going into those planes or having to do anything inside them. It's a completely different entity.
Oh, okay. I do have a question. It's like sidetrack, but as they shot on those Lux screens, as someone who's worked in the industry for a number of years, how have you found that sort of technology being brought into filmmaking? Think,
I had never worked on, the only thing I knew about, and that I subsequently saw the film after, but I'd never seen those screens before. I had never seen them before. And I was absolutely fascinated. I mean, it's extraordinary. And then I went and saw what's the film. It was I can't remember the film now. It was last year. Anyway, and they used it. They had planes flying through a narrow valley. I can't remember the name of the film. It had Tom Cruise in it.
was that Top Gun?
Yes, that's right, Top Gun. And suddenly I was watching it, and they had to, bomb this particular target. And I suddenly realized, oh my God, this is what we're doing. This is what it's going to be like. This is how thrilling it's going to be. We won't just be seeing. It's just a completely different way of filming. I mean, it's so thrilling, is the way I can say it, and extraordinary at what you can do and what you can achieve with them. But it's not my world. I just appreciate it.
I guess as well when it's always interesting to hear people's point of view on it because it's something that is such new tech where some people say it looks great, other people say it doesn't look great. Sometimes you can tell the difference when people are there or not. But it's just interesting to get different departments' view on it, um,
Yeah,
and how they sort of look at it as well.
it's different. Well, every department looks at the film differently. If you're talking to a costume designer, she'll be looking at her costumes. I mean, you watch the movie, you're always anxiously looking after your little flock, aren't you? Your stuff that you've done. You can't sort of separate from that.
No, and I guess when you're on set or people around a monitor as well, you're looking at your work rather than somebody else's work because if it's you don't want to be the one where you find out your work is not up to
We don't go on the set much. We see director in the morning, and providing the sets are okay, we hand it over to the standbys, because otherwise we'd never get anything done. Now, I got, my days of looking at a monitor are long gone. You just don't have the time to do it, and it's changed so much, But I can't rush in and start redecorating something that's been shot. It's if the director changes the set and moves the lamp, and then that's a decision that's been made by the camera team and by the director, and that's how it stays. Then it's set in stone. So it's completely different to costume and makeup, who've got to constantly be titivating and making sure that hair's in the right place and that the dress is right and it isn't creased and it hasn't got dragged around in the hem or something.
Okay. I guess you're right that if you were on set and you needed to change things, then you wouldn't get anything done because you wouldn't be
You
able to
can't
use the
change it
make.
because once the camera's been on it, it's shot. And then only the standbys know. They'll move things to shot, and then they become set in stone.
Yeah, that's true. I've got a few more questions that I'd like to ask. What would you say was the hardest prop that you guys had to source for the set for the set decorating?
Oh golly. Well, it was all difficult. It was difficult. It was difficult from the very minute we started with the tents, because they had orders for tents, because they're still made, these tents, and not to the same design as we had for the Second World War, but this company is still making tents, and so they had big orders, and we had to persuade them to get our stuff done. That was very, very stressful. That was very, very stressful, I must say. We did it. What was difficult? I mean, there was just a lot of it was very tricky. I mean, it was a very tricky series to make. And also we were, and sometimes you'd think, oh well, it was the conditions that were tricky. So, for instance, when we were doing those concentration camps, especially Moosburg at the end, with all the snow and the ice and the rain, and that was an absolutely ghastly, ghastly set, very big. And we went along on the Monday morning. I don't know, there'd been a huge storm through, and all the tents had collapsed. The insides were all filled with water and mud. This was on the Sunday. But coupled with that, everything had frozen. And the inside of the Red Cross tent at Moosburg was under at least 2 foot of water. And everything that we had in there, because we didn't have beds, so we'd made beds on the floor, and everything was just sodden and soaked. And we had to get pumps, and we had to start pumping all the water out. We had to rebuild things. We slogged all that Sunday. And when Tim, the director, came in on the Monday, he said, my God, this is fantastic. And the reason it was so good was because it was so ghastly. It had become an absolute horror story of a place to live in because it was so grotty and vile. It's very difficult to make things look horrible on camera, really horrible. He was just thrilled with it. And then he said, I'm going in the Red Cross tent. And I said, you can't go in there yet. We're still pumping water out. And he just roared with laughter. He was such a fantastic director to work with. A lot of it's hard, but very rewarding.
I think with the whole tent situation, I'm still quite amazed by that the company's still running today. Just because sometimes you think over time, certain places would close down, especially
Yeah,
if it makes very like specific things.
I think the Americans have a much better track record of keeping things going and making things that have, if it ain't broke, don't change it. There are companies in America that are just producing stuff that they've been producing for years, you know. As indeed there are in the UK. You don't.
Just to wrap up the episode, what was your favorite set to work on?
My favorite set to work on. Well, it was the air base, really. Newland Park. I can't separate the sets, but the debriefing rooms, the briefing room, the hospital, the mess, HQ, getting it all right, doing the Nissen hut, just really day after day, just keeping going, and took a long time to dress. And we got it right in the end, I think.
Yes, that whole Newland set with the airbase, it looks incredible on screen because, as you said earlier, about where they have the debriefing rooms with the maps, just how that's had to look sort of kept all hush hush, and how it's quite funny to look at it with 2024 eyes of how they used to hide the maps with just a screen on top of it
I
compared to
know.
like how they would do it now. But it's, I think, little details like that
Yeah.
get me.
Yeah, it was good. And I mean, finding cinema seats that were right for period. I don't know, it goes on and on, you know. It was amazing. It was really astonishing. I did an EPK, you know, towards the end at Cemetery, and I was asked what I said, it's just the best thing I've ever worked on in my life. I said it was so interesting and so gripping to work on every facet, you know, really was.
And I think that's the best way to end the episode. Celia, thank you
Mhm.
so much for your time today.
Okay, thank you, Robert. I've enjoyed it.
Great, thank you very much. Masters of the Air streaming now on Apple TV Plus. Go out and watch Celia and her team's work, and make sure you keep an eye out on all the details that they put into it. Thank you again, Celia.
Okay, bye.
Take care. Bye bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening. Please subscribe, rate, and review this podcast.